phone hit the kitchen tile before I even realized I dropped it. My daughter-in-law's voice was still coming out of the speaker, bright, laughing, telling someone on the other end about the vacation they were planning. Paris. 2 weeks. First-class tickets. She'd already picked the hotel. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, the kitchen I cooked breakfast in every morning, the kitchen I paid the utility bill for, the kitchen where I'd quietly moved my shaving kit to the hall bathroom so their guests would have more space. And I listened to her describe the trip like it was the most natural thing in the world. My son's wife was going to Paris for her birthday. I was going to receive a bill reminder on mine. I didn't say anything. I bent down, picked up the phone, set it on the counter, and walked back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the framed photo of my late wife Beverly on the nightstand. She was smiling in that picture. We'd taken it at our 35th anniversary dinner, the two of us, at a little Italian place in Asheville. She had marinara sauce on her chin and didn't know it yet. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her. She kept smiling. She always did. "My name is Jean. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years in commercial HVAC installation, and for the past 14 months I've been living in the spare bedroom of my son Mitchell's house in Raleigh, North Carolina." That sentence still sounds strange to me when I say it out loud. I owned a house, a good one. 3 bedrooms, a half-acre lot, the big oak in the backyard that Beverly planted from a sapling the year we moved in, when she passed pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I found myself rattling around in that house like a marble in a shoebox. Every room held something. Her reading chair, the quilt she never finished, the smell of her perfume that I was convinced I could still catch in the hallway even after a year. Mitchell came to visit the Christmas after she passed. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Beverly and I had eaten 10,000 meals together, and he said, "Dad, you shouldn't be here alone." I told him I was fine. He said, "Mom will want you to be around family." That got me. I don't know if Beverly would have wanted that exactly. She was practical. My wife, she would have asked more questions first, but I wanted to believe it because I was lonely in a way I had no language for. The kind of lonely that wakes you up at 3 a.m. not from a nightmare, but from silence. The house was too quiet. I was too quiet in it. So when Mitchell suggested I sell the house, take the equity, and come live with him and his wife Joanna in Raleigh, I told myself it was the right thing, a fresh start, family close by. The house sold for $310,000. After the mortgage payoff and closing costs, I cleared just under $190,000. Mitchell and Joanna had been renting their place in Raleigh, a perfectly nice house in a good school district, but they'd been struggling to put together a down payment on something bigger. They had 2 kids, my grandchildren, Tyler, who was 9, and Sophie, who was 6, and they'd outgrown the rental. Mitchell asked if I'd be willing to contribute to a down payment on a new place, somewhere with enough room for all of us. He showed me listings, 4 bedrooms, a yard for the kids, a finished basement he said could be my private space. I put in $130,000. That left me with roughly $60,000 in savings and my Social Security check every month, $1,840 after Medicare. Mitchell said not to worry about rent, that we were family, that the money I'd put in was more than enough. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The house closed in March. I helped paint the basement. I assembled furniture. I fixed the leaking pipe under the kitchen sink the second week because the plumber Mitchell called wanted $340 and I could see it was just a worn compression fitting. I drove Tyler to soccer practice on Tuesdays because Joanna had a spin class and Mitchell worked late. I picked Sophie up from school on Thursdays. I thought I was pulling my weight. I thought I was home. I'm not sure exactly when things changed. That's the honest answer. It wasn't one morning where I woke up and felt unwelcome. It was more like, you know how a photograph fades, not all at once, just slowly, color leaching out a little at a time, until one day you pick it up and realize it barely looks like what it used to be. The first thing I noticed was the dinners. When I first moved in, we ate together most nights. Joanna cooked. She was a good cook, I'll give her that. Or I cooked, and we all sat at the big table in the dining room. The kids told me about their days. Tyler had started this phase where he wanted to talk about dinosaurs constantly, and I let him because honestly it was endearing, and I didn't mind learning which theropods had feathers. Around month 4 or 5, the dinners started shifting. Joanna would text Mitchell during the day and they'd decide to eat earlier before I got back from wherever I'd been, running errands. Walking the Greenway, sitting in my car in the Harris Teeter parking lot reading the newspaper on my phone, because the house felt different during the day when Joanna was working from home, and I could sense that my presence in the common areas made her tense. We ate at 5:30, she'd tell me when I came in at 6. There's leftovers in the fridge. The first few times I heated something up and ate at the kitchen counter and told myself it was fine, people had different schedules. But it happened again, and eventually I stopped expecting a place at the table. I started buying my own groceries. Nothing dramatic. I'd pick up things at the store and keep them on my designated shelf in the refrigerator, a shelf that had, without any conversation, simply appeared. The top shelf was mine. Below it was theirs. I noticed this the way you notice a lot of things in someone else's house, quietly, and then you think about it at 3 in the morning. Mitchell never said anything directly. That was the thing about my son. He wasn't a confrontational person. He'd inherited that from me, honestly, and I couldn't exactly blame him for it. But there's a difference between avoiding conflict and simply pretending a situation doesn't exist. When I tried to bring things up gently, carefully, he'd get a look on his face that reminded me of when he was 16 and I asked him about the dent in the car. Not guilty exactly, more like exhausted by the conversation before it even started. "Things are fine, Dad," he'd say. "Joanna's just stressed about work." I nodded. I let it go. I kept letting it go. The thing that nobody tells you about being a houseguest who has paid $130,000 to be there is that you still feel like a houseguest. You still feel like a houseguest. You still feel like you're taking up space that belongs to someone else. You still wash your coffee mug immediately after using it, even when there are their dishes from breakfast stacked in the sink. You still apologize when you walk into the living room and they're watching something, even though there's a perfectly good chair right there that everyone knows you sit in, has always been your chair since the day you moved in. But some unspoken renegotiation had happened, and I hadn't been at the table for it. Joanna's birthday was in October. Mitchell told me about it 3 weeks before, not in a "hey, let's all celebrate" kind of way, more in a logistical heads up. They were going to dinner Saturday night. Just the two of them. Did I mind watching the kids? Of course I didn't mind. I loved watching the kids. What I didn't know was that the birthday dinner was apparently just the beginning. The following Monday, I walked into the kitchen while Joanna was on a call. I didn't realize she was on a call. The door was open, and I caught the tail end of it. She was describing a hotel end of it. She was describing a hotel in Paris. Something about a junior suite. Her voice had that lit-up quality that I hadn't heard, directed at anything in our house in months. She saw me in the doorway and her expression flickered. She turned slightly away and racked up the call. "Sorry," I said, backing out. She came to find me 10 minutes later, which surprised me. She stood in the door of my basement room with her arms crossed and said, not unkindly, "Gene, I'd appreciate a knock before you come into the main living areas. I work from home and I'm on calls a lot." I looked at her. I thought about the $130,000. I thought about Tyler's soccer practices and Sophie's school pickups and the pipe under the sink and the 2 weeks I'd spent painting the basement so I'd have a comfortable place to sleep. I thought about the shelf in the refrigerator. "Of course," I said. "I'm sorry." She nodded and left. I sat on the edge of my bed and I thought of Beverly. She wouldn't have let that go. She would have sat down with Mitchell and said gently but clearly, "We need to talk about what's happening here." Beverly had a gift for naming things that the rest of us wanted to leave unnamed. I had always relied on that. I hadn't realized how much until it was gone. I picked up my phone and called my brother, Ted. He lives in Knoxville, runs a small hardware supply company, been married to the same woman for 38 years. Ted is the kind of person who says what he thinks without torturing himself about it afterward. "Come stay with me for a week," he said, after I'd been talking for about 10 minutes. "I can't just, Gene. Come stay with me for a week." I didn't go. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I told myself that living with grown children was an adjustment for everyone. I told myself that Joanna was stressed and Mitchell was overwhelmed and that things would settle down eventually. I kept telling myself things. My birthday is in December, December 11th. Beverly used to make a big deal out of it. Decorations, a cake she spent 2 days on, the kids, when they were small, climbing into bed with us at 7 in the morning to sing off-key. In recent years it had been quieter, just the two of us, dinner somewhere nice. Last December was my first birthday without her. Mitchell mentioned it the week before. He and Joanna had something that night, a work holiday party of hers. They'd already RSVP'd 2 months ago. He was sorry. Could we maybe do dinner that weekend instead? I said absolutely, no problem. The 11th was just a date on a calendar. He looked relieved. The kids made me a card. Sophie drew a picture of me with what I think was meant to be a dog, though it looked more like a rectangle with legs. Tyler wrote, "Happy birthday, Grandpa Gene," and drew a T-Rex wearing a party hat. I kept the card on my nightstand next to Beverly's photograph. That was my birthday. Dinner that weekend never happened. Something came up, as things do. I didn't push it. What I didn't know, until I heard Joanna on the phone 3 weeks later confirming final details, was that my birthday, December 11th, was the same night they had gone out for a private birthday celebration for Joanna, whose birthday was in October. A belated celebration, she was explaining to whoever was on the phone. Mitchell surprised her. A private dining room at a restaurant downtown. Champagne. A necklace she'd been wanting. I stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and I counted to 10. Then I went back downstairs. Christmas came. The house was full of energy. The kids were wound up in the beautiful way children get in December, and I found that I could set a lot of things down and just exist in that for a while. I helped Tyler build a Lego set that took 4 hours. I read Sophie every picture book she owned, twice. I cooked the green bean casserole because it was Beverly's recipe and I was the only one who knew it. There was one moment, Christmas morning, when we were all in the living room and Mitchell was handing out gifts, and he handed me a card and I thought for just a second that things might be okay. The card had a gift certificate inside, $50 to a Barnes & Noble. I looked up at him. "I know you like books," he said, smiling. "I do like books." That part was true, but I thought about what they'd spent on Joanna's Paris trip. I'd overheard enough to know it was somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000, and I thought about the $130,000, and I thought about the shelf in the refrigerator. "Thank you," I said. "That's very thoughtful." Joanna looked at her phone while I said it. January and February passed. I became very good at being small. I timed my trips upstairs for when Joanna was on calls in the back office. I ate most of my meals alone. I walked the Greenway every morning, sometimes for 2 hours, partly for the exercise and partly because being outside was the only place where I didn't feel like I was doing something wrong by existing. I called Ted every Sunday. He kept saying, "Come to Knoxville." I kept saying I was fine. In February, Mitchell came downstairs on a Tuesday night with a look I recognized. The look from when he was 16 and there was a dent in the car. He sat in the chair across from mine and he said, "Dad, I've been meaning to talk to you about the household expenses." I waited. Things adjust. Costs have gone up a lot. Groceries, utilities. Joanna and I have been talking and we think it would make sense if you contributed a little monthly for your share of things. "How much?" I asked. We were thinking $800 a month. My Social Security check was $1,840. After the $800, I'd have just over $1,000 for everything else. My own food, gas, my Medicare supplement, any medical expenses. I was 64 years old. I had no other income. I put in $130,000, I said quietly. "I know, Dad, and we really appreciated that. This would just be for ongoing expenses, utilities and stuff." "Mitchell," I stopped. "Started again. I drive your kids to their activities. I fix things in this house. I was here." I stopped. He looked at the floor. I know you do a lot. This isn't about that." I told him I'd think about it. He went back upstairs. I sat in the basement for a long time. I took out my phone and I pulled up my bank account. After Mitchell's down payment contribution, I had $58,400 in savings. At $800 a month on top of my other expenses, I was looking at drawing down several $100s a month from that account. Within a few years, I'd have nothing. I thought about Beverly. I thought about the oak tree in the backyard of the house we'd lived in for 26 years, the house that was someone else's now, the house where she had died. I called Ted. "Come to Knoxville," he said, before I'd even finished the first sentence. This time, I didn't say I was fine. "I want to be clear about something. I am not a man who makes dramatic gestures. I have never in my life stormed out of a room or made a speech. When Beverly and I had our worst arguments, and we had some, every long marriage does, I was the one who went quiet and went for a drive and came back an hour later ready to talk like a reasonable adult. My whole life I have been the person who stays calm and finds the practical path forward. What I did next was, by my own standards, the loudest thing I have ever done. I did it quietly. I spent 3 weeks making arrangements. I did not tell Mitchell. I did not tell Joanna. I called Ted every night and he helped me find a one-bedroom apartment in Knoxville. A clean, bright place on the second floor of a building near the river, $975 a month. Available March 1st. I signed the lease remotely. I called a moving company and reserved a truck for the last Saturday in February. I had very little furniture. A bed, a dresser, the nightstand with Beverly's photo, my armchair, a small bookshelf. Everything fit in a pickup truck honestly, but I wanted the process to feel intentional. Official. Like I was moving, not fleeing. The night before, a Friday, we happened to all be in the kitchen at the same time for the first time in weeks. Joanna was making something for herself, and I was heating up soup, and Mitchell came in to get a glass of water. We were all moving around each other with that careful, elaborately polite choreography that had become the language of the house. Joanna mentioned that they'd finalized the Paris trip details. 2 weeks in April, first class on the way over. The hotel was near the Raleigh district. She said it with the same casual tone you'd use to mention picking up dry cleaning. She did not ask how I would manage the kids' schedules while they were gone. I assumed it was assumed. "That sounds wonderful," I said. She said thank you without looking up. Mitchell refilled his water glass and went back upstairs. I finished my soup, washed the bowl, dried it, and put it back in the cabinet. I went downstairs and finished packing the last box. I left a note. I've thought about that a lot since, whether I should have had a conversation instead, whether the note was a coward's way out, whether Beverly would have approved. I've landed on this. I had tried to have conversations. I had raised things carefully and been met with tired faces and requests to think about contributing $800 a month from my $140 Social Security check. A conversation would have turned into a negotiation, and I was done negotiation. The note said, "Mitchell, the moving company is coming at 9. I've found a place in Knoxville near Ted. I love you, and I love the kids. There's green bean casserole in the freezer, Beverly's recipe. Call me when you're ready. Dad." I didn't mention the money. I didn't mention Joanna. I didn't mention Paris. I propped the note against the coffee maker where Mitchell would see it first thing, and then I sat in my armchair in the basement with my coat on and waited for it to get light outside. My phone rang for the first time at 9:17 a.m., approximately 20 minutes after the moving truck pulled up. By noon, I had 61 missed calls. They were mostly Mitchell, a handful from Joanna, which surprised me. I hadn't realized I ranked high enough on her list to warrant that kind of effort. 3 from Mitchell's sister Ellen, who lives in Charlotte and who I hadn't spoken to in 2 months. 1 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Joanna's mother, which was a new development. I let them go to voicemail through the loading and the drive and the first hour in the new apartment, where Ted and his wife Linda helped me carry boxes up the stairs, and Linda made sandwiches and nobody asked me to explain myself or tell them what I was feeling. Ted just handed me a sandwich and pointed at the window and said, "River's nice in the afternoon light." It was. I called Mitchell back that evening. He answered on the first ring. "Dad." His voice was different than I'd heard it in a long time, not the tired, careful tone. Something raw underneath it. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to," I said. Different words. "Over a long time." Silence. "The money," he started. "Let's not talk about the money tonight." More silence. "Are you okay?" "Mitchell." I looked at Beverly's photo, which Ted had helped me set up on the windowsill so it faced the room. "I am better than I've been in 14 months. Yes." He didn't have an answer for that. We talked for a while about the kids, about logistics, about nothing hard. Before we hung up, he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I think things got... I don't know. I'm sorry." It wasn't everything. It wasn't an accounting of the $130,000 or the shelf in the refrigerator or the birthday I spent alone while they went to dinner 2 weeks later. But it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in longer than I wanted to count, and I held on to it. "I know," I said. "I'll be here when you're ready to talk more." I have been in Knoxville for 4 months now. The apartment is small and it is mine. I know where everything is. I eat dinner at whatever time I want. I have a coffee mug that lives on the counter because I use it every single morning, and there is no one for me to apologize to for leaving it there. Ted and I have breakfast on Thursdays. Linda is teaching me to make her mother's biscuit recipe, which involves lard and a technique I have not mastered yet and which Beverly would have found hilarious to watch. I walk along the river most mornings. Tyler calls me sometimes just to talk about dinosaurs. Last week he told me at length about new research suggesting some sauropods may have had more complex social behaviors than previously thought. I didn't understand half of it. I listened to every word. Mitchell and I talk on Sundays. It is careful still, sometimes. There are things we are both circling that we haven't gotten to yet, but he calls. He keeps calling. The $130,000 is something we will have to address eventually. I have talked to an attorney. I am not rushing it. I am not angry, exactly. Or rather, the anger is there, but it's not the loudest thing anymore. The last thing is this. I wake up in the morning in a room that is mine, in a life that is mine again, and I have the strange and specific pleasure of not apologizing for any of it. Beverly would have gotten here faster. She always did. But I got here. That's what matters. I got here. I keep coming back to the shelf in the refrigerator. Not the Paris trip, not the $130,000, not the birthday I spent alone while they went to dinner 2 weeks later, just that shelf. The quiet, wordless way it appeared one day. Your food up here, ours down there. And how I accepted it without a single question. That's the part I sit with now. There's a version of me that stayed, that paid the $800 a month, that kept timing his trips upstairs to avoid Joanna's calls, that kept washing his coffee mug before it had a chance to be noticed on the counter. I know exactly how that version ends, not with a confrontation or a dramatic falling out, just with a slow, steady disappearing, a man making himself smaller and smaller until there's almost nothing left to see. What I've learned, and I'm slow to learn things, Beverly always said so lovingly, is that the consequences of our choices don't always announce themselves. They accumulate. Mitchell and Joanna didn't set out to diminish me. I don't believe that. But they made choices, small ones, over and over, and those choices had weight. The unanswered birthday, the shelf, the $800 ask from a man living on Social Security. Every one of those was a choice. And on my side, every time I told myself I was fine, every time I let something go that I should have named, those were choices too. We built that situation together, even if we built it differently. What finally moved me wasn't anger. It was clarity. There's a difference. Anger wants to be witnessed. Clarity just knows what the next right step is and takes it. The morning I sat in my armchair with my coat on, waiting for daylight, I wasn't furious. I was just done waiting for things to get better on their own. I think about the people who stay in those situations for years, not because they're weak, but because leaving requires something that's genuinely hard to find when you've been made to feel small for long enough. It requires the honest assessment to look at your own life and say, this is not what I agreed to, and I deserve better than this. It requires the willingness to act on that assessment even when acting means disrupting something, disappointing someone, stepping into uncertainty. And it requires the patience to rebuild, not dramatically, not all at once, but brick by brick, a Riverview apartment and Thursday breakfasts with your brother and biscuit recipes you haven't mastered yet. Those 3 things, the honesty to see clearly, the courage to act on what you see, and the steadiness to keep going after. I think that's the whole game. I didn't have all three for a long time. I had the honesty mostly. The courage came late. The steadiness I'm still working on. Ted handed me a sandwich on moving day and pointed at the river and didn't ask me to explain myself. That's what it looks like when someone actually has room for you. Not a shelf in their refrigerator. Room. I got here. That's what Beverly would have said. Slower than she would have liked, but I got here.